This is the Symphony Circle Sidewalk Engineering Report as part of the Robinson Trust Sidewalk Program. At the April 26th Council meeting, the Council authorized the design to go forward for 9 Robinson sidewalk projects, but the Council did not specify which side of the street the sidewalk would be built upon for those projects. They also asked that Public Works prepare an engineering report to look at the pros and the cons for a project on either side of the street. And they asked for DPW to do that report and to make a recommendation. The factors that were to be considered would be whether or not one side rather than the other side has more favorable support from the property owners. One side may have less impact on trees, less grading on private property, that there be no constructability issues such as utility poles that cannot be designed around, connectivity to adjacent sidewalks, trails, schools, parks, shopping areas, or other destinations, and cost. The engineering reports will be provided to Council, and they will make a decision which side of the street the sidewalk should be built upon. The format of those reports is that DPW has made a concept design for each side of the street, Concept 1 and Concept 2. And then DPW has performed an analysis of each of those concepts, and we've also made a recommendation. Symphony Circle Southwest is a street that's approximately 480 feet in length. It has an L-shaped main stem section, and then it ends in a cul-de-sac. There are 12 homes with frontages on Symphony Circle. The L-shaped alignment of the roadway limits the sight distance for drivers as they enter Symphony Circle and drive towards the cul-de-sac. We'll talk more about this later. One of the town's main objectives with the Robinson Trust Sidewalk Program is to create a network of sidewalks. This project will provide a safe ADA access to Melody Lane where a future project is planned. The safe route to Melody Lane will achieve this goal of a connection to the network. Neither of the concepts to be presented with this report extend into the cul-de-sac and route around the perimeter of the cul-de-sac. Both concepts reach into the main stem of the roadway a sufficient distance to increase the sight distance. So here's a diagram that illustrates the sight distance. Here we have a vehicle that's just turned off of Melody Lane onto Symphony Circle Southwest. When the vehicle is at this location, the topography, the elevation of this yard, as well as the existing tree here and the existing tree here, limits the driver's ability to see beyond the turn in this area. His vision is obstructed. The driver has clear vision in this area that I'll outline here. That's the driver's area where he has clear vision. But beyond that, farther into the cul-de-sac, his vision is obstructed by the trees and the topography, the elevation in the yard of 914. This is Concept 1, which is sidewalk along the north side of Symphony Circle Southwest, which would be the even side addresses. It starts at the curb return of Melody Lane and extends along this main stem section of the roadway to where the existing Norway spruce is, and it ends with an ADA ramp at that location. Let's look at the typical section for Concept 1. First of all, we have a 36-foot wide street from the face of the curb to the face of the curb, 36 feet. We have a 50-foot existing right-of-way. So that means that we have 7 feet from the face of the curb to the right-of-way on each side. For this concept, we're using a 1.5-foot utility strip behind the existing curb and then a 5-foot concrete sidewalk. As an alternative to this, we could, in the later stages of design, we could use a different section, which would be a 6-foot concrete sidewalk behind the existing curb and not have a utility strip. That could be determined later in the design. Here we're looking at an aerial photograph with Concept 1 drawn on top of it. You can see on the photograph the magenta lines, which represent the right-of-way lines. The cyan lines represent the property lines. These green symbols are the trees that were part of the tree inventory done by our arborist. So for example, this is 11-inch Norway spruce. This is an 18-inch diameter Norway spruce. This tree is one that was just planted by the development as it was being completed. And also this photograph of this lot shows this is the house that's been removed and a new house has been constructed. The approximate footprint of that house is shown in the pink line here. So here is an ADA ramp, which is the end of the project on the western end. And then we have the sidewalk along the frontage of 914. And then here at the corner property, which is 111 Melody Lane, there's an existing fence that starts approximately at this location, and it extends to where the driveway is. So we'll have the sidewalk outside of that fence running parallel to the fence, and then we'll have a replacement driveway apron, and then we'll have at the curb return another ADA ramp. But in the future, there is another Robinson sidewalk project planned for Melody Lane. If that Melody Lane project is to be on this west side of Melody Lane, this project will connect to that. If the Melody Lane project happens to be a sidewalk on the eastern side, then there would be another ADA ramp and a crossing to that project on Melody Lane. Next, let's look at the photographs of the areas of the design. Here you can see where the project ends. This is the 18-inch Norway spruce, and this is the 11-inch Norway spruce. This is the site while it was still in construction, but the ADA ramp would be approximately at this location here. Okay, here in the next photograph, what we're looking at is the curb return where the main stem of Symphony Circle starts to round the corner going towards the cul-de-sac. Again, this photograph was taken during the construction. You can see the silt fence is up, but that house has since been completed and the lot has been regraded, so it looks different than that today. Now let's look at the photo above. This photo shows the frontage of 316, taken approximately from the driveway, looking to the west towards the bend of the main street. You can see there's an existing fence along this property. Here's the existing curb, and the proposed sidewalk would go between the two. Okay, next, in this photograph, we're standing at the intersection of Melody Lane. We're looking to the west, and here you can see the driveway that we mentioned, existing fence, and the sidewalk will continue across the driveway and will end approximately at this location. The next photo above is taken from across the street, across Melody Lane, looking towards where the project is. Again, the project ends at about this location, and at this corner you can see there's an existing 24-inch diameter Bradford pear, and then just next to it there's a 7-inch diameter flowering dogwood. So that's concept one, which is sidewalk on the north side, which is the even side of Symphony Circle. And it's a design which has the sidewalk extending about 250 feet from Melody Lane into Symphony Circle Southwest. Next, let's look at concept two. Here we have concept two. Concept two is a lot more challenging than the first concept, and the reason for that is we have larger trees along the frontages of the properties, and also we have existing utility poles. The big challenge with concept two is getting around this existing utility pole, which is situated between 917 and 919. Let's look at the photograph of that location. Okay, here you can see is the existing utility pole, existing curb, and here's the existing fence, which is actually at the property line. There's no way to put a sidewalk between the curb and the pole in the front, and there's no way to put a sidewalk behind the pole and in front of the fence. So The only way to get around this issue is to bring the sidewalk inside of the street. In other words, rebuild the street to a narrow width, rebuild the curb, and then put the sidewalk in this area. Typical section for concept 2. Here again we have the 50-foot right-of-way width, and we have the existing street, which is 36 feet from face of curb to face of curb. Under concept 2, we have to narrow the roadway to allow the sidewalk to be built in this area, in front of where the existing curb is today. And what that would involve is bringing the new curb in 6.5 feet from where the old curb is, resulting in a street width of 29.5 feet, which would allow 6.5 feet between where the new curb is going to be and where the old curb was taken out. Here's a closer look at the alignment starting at Melody Lane. We have a new ADA ramp which ties into the existing curb at Melody Lane. Here is where we make the transition to the narrower width. So we have a 29.5 foot width from face of curb to face of curb. Here between 919 and 917, here's that utility pole that we saw in the photograph. And now let's move farther down the street to the next property. At 917, there are quite a few trees in this frontage. Some of them are fairly large trees, but because the new curb and sidewalk is inside of the old curb, I'm not real concerned about cutting the tree roots because we're already underneath where the existing pavement is. Likewise, in 915, there's a large tree, but because the construction is taking place inside of where the old street is, I'm not too concerned about the tree roots of that tree. Here, between 915 and 913, there's another utility pole. Now let's take a look at the photographs of those features. Here we have the frontage of 917 in this photograph. We have a 24-inch sugar maple, 18-inch white pine, 12-inch Canadian hemlock, 18-inch white pine, and a 26-inch Norway maple that shows up in the next photograph. The photograph below, this is the existing utility pole that's in front of 915, and you can see there's a large tree in the background. And here we're looking at the frontage of 913 and 911. We have another large tree in front of 913. And there's another large tree in front of 911. And then we have these three trees, which are between 911 and 909. And also there's a utility pole in there. This is where we make the transition back to the existing curb at the wider width. And we end with the handicap ramp at that location. It's oriented in this direction. So let's take a look at those photographs of that area. Looking at the lower photograph, here we have the frontage of 915. You can see the tree, which is a 16-inch red maple in that property. Next, at 913, you can see that there's a large tree, which is a 34-inch American sycamore. And both of these trees have large root zones, especially the American sycamore. But because the construction is going to be inside of the existing street, those trees should be protected. Looking at the next property, so here we have the frontage of 911. You can see the three trees, the American arborvitaes, and the existing utility pole, which is located very close to where the existing curb is. So there's no way to get a sidewalk in here, so that's another reason why the sidewalk under this scenario has to be built inside of where the existing curb is. So this is our design under concept 2. Again, the south side of Symphony Circle has quite a few challenges. We have the utility poles that are too close to the curb, and then we also have many trees along the frontages that make constructing a sidewalk behind existing curb impossible, so we've had to bring the sidewalk inside of the existing street under concept 2. Next, let's look at the two concepts and do the analysis, which is part 3 of this report. Here's the analysis of the two concepts. We have the analysis of concept 1. which is the construction on the north side of the main stem of Symphony Circle, which is the even side addresses. Concept 2, which is construction on the south side of Symphony Circle in the main stem, which are the odd side addresses. Late last year, Department of Public Works sent out questionnaires to the owners along the properties of Symphony Circle. From the responses that we received for Concept 1, the even side addresses, we had one person in favor of sidewalk and one not in favor. The one person who was in favor of the sidewalk on that north side happens to be the corner property. Those same questionnaires, we had one person on the south side in favor of sidewalk and 3 homeowners on the south side who were not in favor of sidewalk. Next, let's look at the tree impacts for the 2 concepts. Under Concept 1, the construction of this concept does not require removal of any trees. The western limits of this concept end just east of the existing Norway spruce that the developer preserved during construction of the new house. The sidewalk construction should not affect the roots of that tree. During the construction of the new house, they installed a new water line, and those roots were already disturbed because of that construction. At the east end of the project, there's some minor disturbance to the roots of a 7-inch flowering dogwood, and also there could be moderate disturbance to the roots of a 24-inch Bradford pear. But we could consider doing a shorter curb return radii or ending the sidewalk farther to the west, farther from those trees, or we could also consider constructing a curb extension at that corner. The tree impacts under Concept 2 are very minimal. Concept 2 is constructed within the limits of the existing paved street, except at the very end where there's an ADA ramp that ties into existing curb. So the tree impact is very minimal with Concept 2. Regarding impacts to vegetation other than trees, there are plants and vegetation that may be affected by construction, but this report focuses mainly on the construction impacts to the larger trees. If either of these concepts is selected and built, the design will look at the impacts, the specific impacts to that vegetation. Regarding the grading impacts to Concept 1, it appears that there's minimal grading along the frontage of the 2 properties of this concept. Property 914 appears to be fairly level relative to the existing curb. And 111 Melody Lane, the corner property, about half of the property has a fence alongside of it, and that area is fairly level. It's not until we get near the curb return that we might have a little bit of grading, but those construction limits will be determined later in design if this concept is selected. Under Concept 2, it appears there's minimal grading. The corner property, as we get closer to making the transition back to the existing curb, the lot is a little bit higher than the road, so there might be a little bit more grading at that location. But the limits of the actual grading requirements will be determined during final design if this concept is selected. Regarding constructability issues, Concept 1, there were no constructability issues identified with Concept 1. Existing water meters will be relocated as necessary. Regarding Concept 2, the constructability issues were the existing utility poles and the large trees, and that was resolved by bringing the sidewalk and the curb inside of the existing pavement. The cost analysis of the 2 concepts shows that Concept 1 is comparable to other Robinson sidewalk projects, whereas Concept 2 is more expensive than most of the Robinson sidewalk projects because the curb has to be reconstructed. And regarding connectivity, both concepts are comparable in terms of connectivity. There is a Robinson sidewalk project that's being considered for Melody Lane, and that would create the connectivity to the sidewalk network. Finally, in consideration of the factors described within this report, and primarily because of the increased cost associated with building Concept 2, having to rebuild the curb and gutter, Department of Public Works recommends Concept 1.